I think we're running Chaos Theory today. Continuing our badge hunting. I'm still setting up some background music. Just something uh, similar to, yes, Oblivion album by Amis called Oblivion, released last year, 2021. I'll just set this up blank. Set our. There we go. We're picking up some tracks. Looks like we're real soft here. Alright, let's see how all this pans out. Okay. Oh, topic of, well, random discussion. Score ahead. We already got all the badges here. Sharkhead, so I guess I'm moving on villain side to Nerva. Alright, I guess the primary topic of discussion today, or at least the topic at the front of my mind, is the rotting egg. The rotting new egg, as the case may be. A story that's popped, I think the channel's called Gamers Nexus. They bought a used or returned or refurbished they bought a motherboard off of newegg.com. They didn't actually use the motherboard. They didn't ever actually open the motherboard. So they sent the motherboard back to Newegg for a refund. Newegg declined a refund, claiming that the channel broke the motherboard. And the channel apparently went through the normal steps to protest we did not break this motherboard. We did not even open this motherboard. It was still factory sealed when it left us. Here's the pictures. Here's the receipts. Here's all our information. And it wasn't until after Gamers Nexus went public on their YouTube channel with the difficulties with Newegg did they get a refund. But it has kind of left a sour taste as further investigation appears to reveal that Newegg.com was knowingly selling broken parts that they knew had been RMA'd for non-functionality, just reselling those and putting them back out. And I can't say I'm surprised. Now, this isn't due to any particular issue that I've had with Newegg. I haven't actually bought anything from Newegg in quite a long while. I haven't had the money to buy anything from Newegg in quite a long while. Um, but that doesn't mean that I had turned off the Newegg.com newsletters. And there was something in the newsletters recently that was a giant red flag. Now, I do need to explain a bit of behind the scenes marketing to what some people may or may not be familiar with. But many of the sale items that are available that you see when you pick up an advertisement in a newsletter, many of those sale items may not necessarily be on sale. Case in point, I think it was Kroger was recently busted for going out, changing the price tag on items and putting a higher price tag, and then putting the actual prices of the product as an on sale tag, which was, well, by a number of people deemed to be pretty skeevy, if not downright dishonest, making something that is not on sale seem like it's on sale by falsely giving it a higher price tag and giving the real price, a colored sticker indicating that it's on sale. However, the catch here is that many of these sales in supermarkets or in your local fires or in your newspapers are not done in ice. Hang on, give me a second. It's cold outside and my cat is open the door. That's the problem with having a cat that's turned into a raptor from Jurassic Park. He knows how to open doors. And unfortunately, the kind of door I've got, I can't actually put a kitty flap in it so he can just come and go. Because if I do that, then I have to go get new doors, and new doors can get kind of expensive. Anyway, so, where was I? Talking about the practicalities of newspaper sale ads. Many of the times, those ads that you see in flyer, paper, magazines, whatever, the ads are not being run by the store. The ads are being run by the manufacturer. A good case in point would be Coca-Cola. Oh, there's a badger. Sorry, I need to get that. All right. Say like you have buy one get one free Coca-Cola. These kind of deals are not done separate of Coca-Cola. The retailer, be it Kroger, Publix, Winn-Dixie, Bilo, whatever, they don't just up and say, okay, this week we're going to just run all of our Coca-Cola products, get buy one, get one. No, they work in conjunction with the vendors to make this kind of sale happen. So Coca-Cola allocates a larger shipment of Coca-Cola products, and Coca-Cola is aware that this chain will be doing this sale at this time, and they estimate that they're going to move this amount of product, so they need to have this amount of product here. Now, a little bit more behind the scenes. The big reason that a lot of these sales work, and this goes into something I've talked about in previous streams, is it simplifies shipping and logistics. And this is something that's really big, say, in the pizza business, where you have various pizzas that are on sale. If you can predict where your ingredients are going to go, what ingredients you need, you can simplify and lower the cost of storing those ingredients or getting those ingredients to their place or where they need to be. If you, and this comes down to electrical power, storing the ingredients, however much electricity it costs to get them to the right temperature, however much fuel you need to move them from one location to another, all of these shipping logistics, if you can more accurately predict when and where you're ultimately going to be sending these items. A Hess has started up, so as soon as I grab this badge, we will go for the Hess. Got the badge, got all the badges here, so let's leap on over to the Hess. And we're probably about to get... No, I don't want Lady Grey. I won't... Okay, we're going to have to do a jump to Moonfire. Alright. Anyway, so shipping and logistics, pretty big. It's a pretty big factor in how sales are managed and how sales are determined. But on top of this, vendors, the ones who actually are appearing in a sale brochure, will often be paying for the privilege of appearing in a sale brochure. And that's going to be a key part coming back to Newegg's skeevy, dishonest behavior. And the question has to be asked, out of all of the special sales that Newegg offers, we know from basically how sales like that work that Newegg's not running any sales without the approval of the vendors whose product they are selling. And that's kind of a key distinction. I'm trying to think of the appropriate way to phrase this. It's the question is like this. Let me phrase it like this. Let's say that Newegg has a special on Samsung televisions. $500 off a $3,000 Samsung television and a $75 gift card. Let's say they're doing something like that. That special doesn't happen outside of Samsung's knowledge, because either the vendor, in this case Newegg, would take a hit on the amount of whatever they paid Samsung to sell the television, or Samsung is saying, okay, we've got televisions at this warehouse here. If we can predict where they're going to sell and get them moved from this location without having to store them for the next 6 months, we can sell them now. We don't have to meet our maximum MSRP. We can take a hit on them because we're now not paying for the electricity to keep them in a climate-controlled warehouse for the next however many months. And that's why some of these sales work. It is setting up. It's basically and we're about to probably launch in 1 minute, or we got last call going, so I'm about to go from kind of paying attention to not really paying attention as we crush out this task force. Because it's going to be really hard to focus on this task force. And yep, here we go. Let's cut this over to something a little bit more engaging. C4, and starting off with, here we go. Get home, and then I was around and broken down. See it never, and we both know the sky is the limit. What you What you saying, baby? Man, we both know the sky is the limit. And read my, what you find? The more that you resist me, the greater the damage will be. Don't you dare to read my mind or mind. What you find? The more that you resist me, the greater the damage will be. Don't you dare to read my mind, what you find? Resist me, the greater the damage will be. shotgun. And now, anyway. Well, that was fast. Yes. Okay. Now let's change this back to something calmer. Ooh, Distant Worlds 2 by Purple Cat. I can remember listening to Distant Worlds once and kind of liking it, so we'll kick that on. Slow things up a bit. Alright, back to the point. Back to badge hunting. We just finished Nerva, so after Nerva, St. Marshall. Alright, and St. Marshall. And actually, we'll go ahead and do these two. Where are we at on streaming time? 28 minutes. Alright, so getting back to jetpack. Badge earned. Second badge should be down here. There we go. Okay, anyways, back to Newegg advertising being skeevy. So we kind of in the first, before, pre-task force, I kind of went into, advertisements aren't made in a vacuum. Advertisements are made in conjunction with a vendor. Advertisements and pre-purchases and pre-orders are used to help simplify logistics, which can save real money, real resources, which can lower the direct price of a product. So bringing this back around to Newegg, one of the red flags very recently, and I mean beyond anything else of customer service related or innuendo or problematic, because any website servicing as many people as Newegg services eventually is going to have people who have complaints of some kind of another, be those complaints justified or be those complaints imagined. And case in point, somebody who gets upset at a grocery store because the grocery store doesn't have any chocolate covered strawberries because it's Valentine's and they really wanted chocolate covered strawberries. Well, strawberries themselves are dependent upon farms who, well, plant and harvest strawberries. And chocolate is dependent on farms that plant and harvest cocoa beans or have some other form, I'm not aware of any, of making a synthetic chocolate, but it's, synthetically dipped, plastic dipped chocolate covered strawberries are just nasty. So, anyways, if you have somebody who's, say, like, complaining that they couldn't get the chocolate covered strawberries that they wanted to get and they blame the grocery store for that problem, that's not really on the grocery store. Now, if they come back and say, well, the grocery store had chocolate covered cherry, but they weren't the chocolate covered cherries that I wanted or the chocolate covered strawberries that I wanted, again, not necessarily a reflection on the grocery store. But if they come back and say, well, the person who was dipping the chocolate-covered strawberries were dipping them in melted M&Ms. Okay, at that point, you do have something to say that something may be wrong with what the grocery store itself is doing. As you drill down, you have several and the point of this is wide range of complaints, but only a very narrow spectrum of those complaints actually applies to the entity that being complained about. It's something else external. It's not necessarily in the hands of the entity that's being complained about. So when it comes to a site like Newegg, it's very difficult to pin a single complaint to Newegg.com directly because, first of all, Newegg does have a white brand of its own. Last time I checked, it was a brand called Rosewell, which Newegg had an interest in. Whether or not Newegg still has an interest in Rosewell products, I really don't know. I haven't had recourse. I haven't had anyone who's asking in such a way that, yes, I needed to go look that kind of information up. So I really don't know if Newegg and Rosewell are still effectively the same company, just being operated under different names. But Newegg has had previously an interest in white box products and rebranding, renaming OEM. Did I get the badge for this? Yes, I did. Renaming or rebranding white box products as their own products. And okay, so fair point there. Going into Newegg's history. So that's something you just can't set aside, ignore, pass around. Newegg has been both a retailer selling other vendors' products as well as a retailer in the sense that they sell their own products. So that is something, and it's further complicated by the fact that almost anybody can set up a shop and sell products on Newegg. Newegg has a marketplace, so anyone who goes through some steps can put products that they want to sell on Newegg.com. Now, Newegg may handle the shipping, Newegg may handle the warehousing, and that is something that you do have to be on the lookout for, whether or not the product that you are buying is necessarily warehoused and being sold by Newegg, or if it's just being warehoused by Newegg for a third party, or it's being sold by a third party and warehoused by a third party, and Newegg is only functioning as the listing agent, as in the entity where somebody went and put up the ad saying, I got this for sale, and they just listed it on Newegg.com, but that's the extent of Newegg's involvement. Now, when it comes to newsletter advertisements, that kind of goes, the layering of defenses here kind of goes out the windowing, because a newsletter advertisement product is one that Newegg is explicitly using the Newegg name to back. They're using the Newegg branding, the Newegg website. They're using the market influence of the brand name to push a specific product. So whether or not Newegg is merely hosting it, being the listing agent, or being the warehousing no longer matters. Newegg is using their own value as a brand, as a website, as a retailer location that is known of. They're using that to push a specific product when they advertise that product. So that immediately obviates if you go and you buy something, say on Newegg, but the seller was, say, ECOP, and I don't know if ECOP sells. I know ECOP sells on Amazon. I don't know if they sell on Newegg. But let's say that ECOP, they sell things like holsters and laser sights. Let's say that you were looking for a Viridian laser sight for a Ruger LCP2. We'll just go with that off the top of my head. And let's say that you went on Newegg and you found one for sale, and the seller was ECOP. And ECOP just has the Ruger LCP2 laser sight by Viridian for sale. They're listing it through Newegg.com, and you buy it, and you determine, oh wait, you don't have an LCP2, you've got an LCP380, you need to send it back. You send the laser sight back because it doesn't work, and you get hit with a restocking charge. Well, because the seller was ECOP, the warehouser was ECOP, then you don't really have a recourse to go to complain to Newegg, even though Newegg hosted was the one where you paid your money through to, and who had the item for sale on the Newegg website, because all Newegg did was just serve as, well, they listed it here, and yes, you did use our transactional services to purchase it, but the warehousing, the shipment, and everything else was on eCop. If you have a problem with eCop's restocking, you got to go talk to eCop. That defense really doesn't apply when it comes to an advertised item, because in the case of the eCop laser sight, eCop is not using Newegg's name to promote you can buy this laser sight, and it is incumbent upon the user to be aware of the products or product type that they are buying. You buy the wrong laser sight because you don't know what weapon somebody had that you're buying for, then that's entirely upon you. Maybe a restocking fee is in order, because as the consumer, you didn't do any research. And you can have a nice little legal fight one way or the other over whether or not a restocking fee was really valid for a product that wasn't the right product. And the reason I go down this example is because now we get into what Newegg actually did. And I'm using the example that occurred with Amazon that I'm quite well aware of, because somebody didn't know what weapon they had, and they were very upset at a restocking fee. And that kind of thing really does, what is your recourse, who stocked it, who sold it. You just can't flame the website where you bought it from if they're not the ones who were selling the product or warehousing the product. If they were just functioning as the financial assistant, the ones who took the payment rather than the shop setting up their own payment system, then the middleman website really doesn't have anything to do with the purchase, even though they are the website that you went to get this specific product or other. But very, very recently, Newegg went and listed scalper-priced graphics cards on the main advertisement, on the main newsletter, the promotional advertisement that went out to mailboxes. The flagship offer, the in bold, get this now, get this at this price, were scalper graphics cards at, I think, 3 times MSRP. The manufacturer suggested retail price point. Basically, the price where everyone involved is supposed to be able to make a profit if they sell the item at this amount. Newegg instead was listing graphics cards that were being sold by scalpers, not by legitimate retailers. And that's a critical difference here, because when it comes to that newsletter advertisement, the question has to be asked: did these scalpers pay Newegg to have their scalper-priced graphics cards featured in Newegg's advertisement? Or, to be more blunt about it, did Newegg get an extended above-average kickback from advertising and pushing a graphics card that was deliberately overpriced above and beyond the MSRP, strictly for the personal profit, the theft of money, the extortion of money from intended clientele? Did Newegg knowingly try to profit off of that? Was Newegg paid for that advertisement? Did Newegg receive any additional money for highlighting that advertisement and using the Newegg.com branding in the Newegg newsletter to push scalper-priced graphics cards? If the answer to that is yes, then Newegg actually committed a crime. They actually participated in extortion and fraud. So that Newegg is doing skeevy things, things that are legally wrong, at least under many definitions of fair trade, or many definitions of criminal fraud or criminal extortion, then it really shouldn't come as a surprise that maybe Newegg is doing other things on a less than legal basis. Now, the big question I think on a lot of people's mind is, well, why would Newegg do this anyways? Well, that answer is actually pretty simple. It's called market momentum. And if you don't understand what market momentum is, we're going to get into kind of economic 001. This is the kind of thing you probably should have learned in grade school, but it's not actually taught in grade school. And in fact, it's not really taught in any economic classes or current economics classes. And the case in point, the example that I like to focus on when it comes to market momentum is GameStop. Now, as most people know, GameStop's been kind of having a rough time of it lately. To the point that employees of GameStop are routinely coming forth with information on how GameStop is deliberately pushing used game sales in place of new game sales because used game sales have a much higher profit margin. And the financial woes of GameStop are, well, pretty much well known to anybody who has any kind of foot in the gaming market. And if you'll give me a second, I need to see what other location badges I need, because I'm pretty sure I've completed Hero Side. Where's my badge list? There's 5 in Glad, 1 Planetariac. Badge checking. Okay, clubs. Got Granville. Okay, it looks like I am heading towards the Praetorian side for the rest of these. Okay. We'll head back to Granville and then make our swap over. Right. Anyways, thing is, GameStop's financial woes are not really surprising. And part of that is looking at the locations that GameStop went into. GameStop took out a lot of long-term leases in strip malls. GameStop took out a significant number of rentals, and GameStop went into places where there was intentionally a substantial amount of foot traffic. So shopping malls, shopping strips. And thing is, you look at most of these storefronts that GameStop went into, and the vast majority are aggressively tiny. Give me a second here, because we're also going to be going for River Rat badge, and I need to keep track of how many bridges I've actually crossed under. Alright, let's find... Got to find an in progress. I'm not real sure. Oh, hang on, just so. Okay, Hero, 1 Memorial. Okay, link the Praetoria's Rivers. So, need to keep an eye on this number and make sure it increments. Okay, now we'll go back to the map, and got 2 badges up on top here. Alright, anyway, so GameStop's retail presence, the locations where GameStop selected themselves to be, were all optimized for foot traffic. And for across the 1980s and 1990s and early 2000s, that was pretty good. Because if you wanted to go grab your selection of your limited release game, and let's face it, most retailers didn't have a very in this case, let's talk about Walmart, Best Buy, Target, Roses. They probably didn't have a wide selection of video games to choose from. They maybe had a small selection of Nintendo, a small selection of Sega, and maybe a small selection of Sony games, but not really much beyond that. And that becomes very critical in a way when, hang on as I'm counting this number up, it's when you're talking about if you were heavy into anything but the top 20 games, as in if you were into Japanese role-playing games, if you were into rhythm games, if you were into farming games, if you were into any kind of niche genre game, you were not going to find it at a major retailer. You, however, probably were going to be able to find that game at GameStop, because GameStop had those hardcore-oriented, gamer-oriented titles, and that was a huge selling point for GameStop. Well, flash forward a few years, and while GameStop's presence as a the ability to land hold of import titles, to play import titles, gradually lessened. First of all, you had websites like LikeSync, which made importing rare titles much easier. You had, for a while, even GameStop got in on bringing in importing games that were going to be hard to get in the US. GameStop made a very big deal out of you could get Shenmue 2 for the Dreamcast, and they bundled it together with a import defeating device so that you could play the European version of Shenmue 2 on your Dreamcast in the US. And that was a pretty big deal, and that was the kind of thing that GameStop had really become known for, and that it catered to the hardcore gaming market. Well, as time goes on, you have more and more digital release games. You have more and more online buying where you can go and purchase you can purchase a game that's going to be available, and more games started having limited releases. Limited run games, for example, has a very good business going of releasing desirable titles for gamers to get their hands on that may not have another wide retail release, or may not have had anything other than a am I on the wrong side? I think I'm on the wrong side for this. Okay, I think I went over them. Yeah, sure. Alright, anyway, so GameStop kind of missed out on the entire the Amazon revolution, the ability to purchase desirable games, and niche game developers realizing that there was a market for games that major publishers like Activision and Electronic Arts were saying would never sell in the US market. And they're finding that these games, these digital release games that are translated and fully functional, are selling very well enough to be profitable. In fact, publisher Xseed is profitable bringing over limited games that many publishers, larger publishers, said, oh, that'll never work. Chucklefish, which I think publishes Starbound, likewise has a very good business going, publishing titles that larger publishers said, we can't make money off of that, nobody wants that. Well, no, there is a market. Just because you don't understand the market doesn't mean the market's not there. And that's kind of important to understand when framing GameStop's ongoing financial woes. It's not just that GameStop was failing to understand changing market conditions, although that definitely was a factor. It was the retail positioning. GameStop was positioning itself as a major retailer of mass market games. But the presence of major retail mass market games has slowly been decreasing. Gaming is inherently a social medium. It's you either play with somebody, you play against somebody, or you share your experience with somebody. And then we've gone into the PlayStation 3, the Xbox 360, the Xbox One, PlayStation 4, the PlayStation 5, the Xbox Series X. Native streaming of games is starting to become something that, well, almost all the consoles do. Maybe not very well, but at least adequately well. We're at 10. Let's count it up. 10, 11. All right, anyways. So kind of functioning back on that, the solution to GameStop's financial woes was, well, from an outside perspective, absurdly easy. All GameStop had to do was adjust from being a mass market games vendor to focusing more on collectible items. And there's I think I got it, but I'm going to go double check and make sure I got it. Focusing on offering products that, well, aren't easily found. Collector's items like figurines, trading cards, peripherals. And there's been a number of controllers over the years that gamers have loved, but because a vendor went out of business or sold off their assets. And I'll pick on Nyko for a second. For a long time, Nyko had a product called the Airflow. And I love the Nyko Airflow mouse. It was honestly one of the best gaming mice that I had ever used. And I've always been kind of crushed that Nyko stopped making it and focused on other products. And, okay, yes, there are now vented mice with little fans in them out there. So somebody else has stepped up and addressed that market segment. But the ones that I've held aren't, I don't think they are built as well as the Nyko Airflows were. They don't feel as robust. As they feel more like a 3D filament printed item than industrial pressed fitting, which, could just be a choice in plastic. The plastic feels cheap. And that's not exactly a feeling you want on a good gaming mouse. You don't want the mouse to feel cheap. Really, really cheap. So anyways, and GameStop kind of missed out on the revolution it could have been part of because of its location. GameStop didn't have the physical room to turn GameStop locations into gathering locations. GameStop didn't have the floor footprint where they could support 30 or 40 gamers coming together to have a Halo tournament. GameStop didn't have the retail footprint to support. I'm missing a no where you are. Unless it got moved. That's always a possibility. May have gotten moved. Alright, anyways. GameStop didn't have the physical space available to change the concept of the business. Instead of GameStop could not embrace the rise of LAN gaming. They couldn't embrace the rise of console online gaming. It couldn't. GameStop could not become a LAN center where gamers could go and just play against each other on consoles hooked up to an internet connection. GameStop wasn't a place where you could host card game competitions. You couldn't turn GameStop into a tournament center, LAN center. You couldn't really do anything with the locations. They were just so physically space limited due to the business model decisions made early on in GameStop's life. And that's part of the problem that GameStop kind of runs into, just looking forward and looking backwards, as the case may be. There wasn't any way for the company to grow as a beyond the retail offerings that they had. And the retail offerings that GameStop had were very much beginning to pale, and GameStop really let go of being the place where gamers could go to get games that were not being released into domestic markets. GameStop really stopped being the place where gamers could go to get their news on what were happening. Part of it is to publishers and developers stepping up their online game by offering blogs and putting up YouTube videos and making YouTube channels. I mean, a good example of that is Idle Champions. I don't care for the go woke, go broke, he, him, their pronoun junk that the channel forces on everyone who takes part in a Dungeons and Dragons, Idle Champions, whatever they're doing. The whole political aspect of their posturing just is an immediate turnoff, but the developers' willingness to get on and talk about the game, talk about the characters, talk about the strategies, talk about what's going on is, quite frankly, astounding. I mean, it's the kind of almost anti-Nintendo mentality. It's, we're going to talk about everything because, well, everything that we do influences everything that we do. So we're going to talk about how you can use these characters, and that makes Idle Champions a very approachable game to get into. There's a wealth of information about it that's coming straight from the developers and, well, not being hashed by anybody in between the developers and the consumers. And it's that kind of growth in developers actually getting involved with their client base that has kind of limited the ability of GameStop, where advertising in GameStop or advertising in Walmart has much less of an impact now than it did in the past, because developers can be more upfront with their clientele base, and developers who aren't upfront with their clientele base, well, you kind of get what's going on with the Activision right now, and okay, that was all 8 badges. I guess it got moved at some point. I'm Vigilante, probably can't get in. Nope. Head to underground access. So, okay. So kind of keeping that in mind. The obvious solutions to turn GameStop from a floundering Leviathan into a successful company just was not possible because of the physical limitation that had been imposed by earlier decisions over how the company should theoretically be operated. Okay, actually, I want to go back down this way. And that kind of flash forwards, flash outwards, going back to Newegg. Newegg's made a lot of decisions about how the company should be run or should be viewed or should be managed. And a number of those decisions are ages old. The decision to be a marketplace was pretty much enforced by Amazon. Newegg just couldn't warehouse and sell products. It had to allow uh, other third parties own to sell their products. And that was kind of a natural response of, if all of your sellers, all of your warehouses are all operating on Amazon, either you give them an alternative to Amazon, or you just accept that you've lost the business that they could be bringing in. And that's an important question to keep in mind when coming back to, well, what went wrong? What happened with Newegg to put them in a position where they would willingly take money from somebody who is consciously committing fraud or extortion? Well, the painful answer is how the company made money. And another factor to keep in mind, especially if you look historically, Newegg made their big mark by breaking the retail chains like CompUSA. CompUSA was known for hiking the price on products selling far above the MSRP, in some cases 2 or 3 times above the MSRP, and CompUSA was the only source for a significant number of products. So if you needed a graphics card or a motherboard and CompUSA was the only place you could get it, you had to pay CompUSA's prices. But then along came Newegg, which does this in at first national shipping in the US and then expanding to other markets, where now you can pay MSRP, the price you're supposed to be paying for a product, get the product at that price. And that change is really what put companies like CompUSA out of business. They weren't selling the product to the intended clientele at the intended price, and the result was they collectively got their butt handed to them when a vendor came along who was willing to sell the product at the intended price point to who the product was supposed to go to. All right. And that's how can I put this? It's not the Hollywood syndrome, but it kind of is. In the Hollywood syndrome, you have this progression of managers who take over operating somebody else's investment portfolio. Actually, I'll refer to a webcomic. Dinotaku's, and I know he doesn't go by that name anymore, but that's how I'm always going to think of him. Dinotaku's Girl Power, a superhero webcomic. In Dinotaku's Girl Power webcomic, he sets up that all of the heroes are very well compensated by the federal U.S. government for their services, and in order to help the superheroes deal with the massive amounts of money that they are now getting, they are provided a wealth manager who oversees the investments and the consumption of the money that these heroes are being paid. And that's kind of a reference back to, okay, let's circle this back around. You look at the profits that a company like Newegg starts to pull in, and you look at the amount of money that they're handling, and you look at the scale of their operation. Well, what happens when you get beyond their original expertise and they start having economies of scale problems that they just don't have the internal expertise to handle? What are they going to do? Well, in the most cases, businesses start to look for contract employees who do have experience in handling these economies of scale in products. Problem is, most of the people who have experience in this sort of market don't necessarily have good experience if they're looking for a new job. And in case in point, you really don't want the person who was at Sears and Roebuck that ran Roebuck into the ground, making decisions about how a company is supposed to be run. It's not going to end well. But that's kind of what happened with a number of companies as they get larger. They start looking for logistics expertise, and they get somebody who, well, did run a significant amount of logistics. Maybe not successfully, but they did have experience in it, and so they were hired. And they start hiring money managers to handle these massive bank accounts, and as the economies of scale go up. And then when you start doing that, you also start bringing in executives who, well, aren't necessarily making good choices. And it's going back to the go woke, go broke crowd. From a financial standpoint, everybody knows, every good financial analyst knows, that liberal leftist socialist ideologies are not a market power. You cannot appease a liberal leftist socialist enough to get them to buy your product. You can appease a conservative foundationalist right-wing person to get them to buy your product. Conservatives are an economic powerhouse, and this goes into something called the Disney duck. Now, if you're not familiar with the Disney duck, several years ago, Focus on the Family, Family Research Council, and AFA, I forget what AFA stands for, sorry, called for a boycott of Disney. And this was during the Michael Eisner era. Well, Michael Eisner proudly went before shareholders and investors several times to say that the conservative religious right boycott against Disney was having no effect. And there were charts with profits, graphs, and showing that, okay, on surface, Disney profits weren't changing. They were still making pretty much the same amount of money. But what Eisner was doing was not accurate, nor was it truthful, because behind the scenes, you had things like the Disney direct-to-sequel VHS animation plans, where a number of movies suddenly had sequels being released on VHS that were very cheaply made. And you had the demise of the Disney animation studios. This also coincides with the decision to rely on Pixar to produce a number of films for Disney, and the rise of 3D animation to cut costs. On top of that, on top of these studio changes behind the scenes, where you no longer have where Disney's classic film division is just gone, never to release another video, there was a massive slashing in planned cruise lines. Orders for ships, some of which were half built, were canceled, pulled, no more funding, don't need to ship anymore. Additional grounds for Disney resorts were canceled. Construction that was underway was halted. Land was sold. And all of these events were happening behind the scenes so that Michael Eisner could stand up in front of shareholders and say, everything's fine, the boycott's not affecting us, but behind the scenes, everything was being torched to the ground. Did I get all the badges? No, I didn't. What badge am I missing? Duration. I also need to go back and bring up the rat. There's go with the rat. I'm missing a badge, but I don't know which one. Is there a badge in here? Oh, it's over there. I see it. I know which one I missed. Anyway, and the Disney duck is something that some economic professors love to teach. It's not necessarily the performance on paper, it's the entire performance of the entity under scrutiny to begin with. Disney was under the conservative religious right boycott. Disney was going bankrupt, so Disney slashed as many costs as they could, torpedoes as many projects as they could, in order to make it look to shareholders and investors that nothing was wrong, even though everything was wrong. And that's an important distinction to keep in mind once you realize the events that transpire when a company is trying to hide gross financial negligence, that they're going to take a lot of the same steps Disney did, the Disney Duck, in order to hide that anything is actually going wrong. And that kind of circling back to, well, what happened with Newegg? Well, they made a lot of decisions from how the company was run. They brought in a lot of new hires who all had differing strategies, but all of those strategies were the kind of strategies that had caused CompUSA to go bankrupt before Newegg. And they're the exact same kind of strategies that have landed others in jail for fraud and extortion. So why hire those people? Well, the simple answer is it's an echo chamber. And what I mean by echo chamber is that if you have somebody who is cited as a financial guru, as a logistics guru, as somebody who really has their fingers on the pulse and the heartbeat needed to run this massive operation, they can get all kinds of operations and they can point to things that they did in the past, even if those events weren't explicitly legal. If they can just point and say, well, we've had experience in this, they can get hired on. And a good example of this would be Gawker. Gawker's reputation as an editorial outlet was terrible. They were literally burning money after having been creamed in a court of law. But Univision stepped in anyways, bought the Gawker assets, and kept the Gawker properties alive. So a site like Kotaku, which should have gone under for financial problems, still exists because somebody else stepped in and bought the site. So now you have editors on Kotaku who can now go to another website and say, we're editors for this site with millions of independent views, and someone else who may not be familiar with the history of Gawker, may not be familiar with the criminal charges, may not be familiar with the lawsuit that was lost, may not be familiar with the reputation of Gawker as an entity, says, you successfully reached several million people with a website when you were an editor. You must be really good. Here, we'll hire you. Why did you just take off all of our customers and get them to boycott us? Well, you hired somebody with a political objective. Well, what did you think was going to happen? It's called doing basic research, otherwise known as doing due diligence. But when it comes to various media hires and various retail strategy hires, there's not really a due diligence, there's not really a background check, there's not really an in-depth research of a resume. There's no, well, what has this person successfully done? Were there any ramifications from this person's actions? Well, when you start doing the research and you realize that, because of this person, they lost several $1 million. The CEO had to spend 5 years in jail, and they are legally barred from ever operating as a chief financial officer due to a court order. Maybe we shouldn't have hired this guy to run our business strategy. Doesn't really seem like a good idea. But that's what has basically happened. And I think that's what's happened with Newegg. I think Newegg hired people who came highly recommended. But just because somebody came highly recommended and had a resume that looked really good, didn't mean that they were the right people to push Newegg forwards. If anything, they were probably the wrong person And the result of their actions is now why Newegg is openly promoting criminal enterprises on their newsletter. Now, I am not personally aware at this point if any state's attorneys have an investigation into Newegg over the newsletter to see if there was criminal collusion with the scalpers to defraud and extort money from legitimate clients. I don't know that any state's attorneys in the U.S. are doing that. I do know the federal agency under President Biden in the U.S. definitely isn't going to be looking into financial misconduct. So keep in mind what I just said. I can tell you the U.S. federal government has no reason or is not going to look into fiscal misconduct on the part of Newegg, but states' attorneys, which already are up in arms over GoFundMe's recent theft of monies that were being collected for Canadian truckers. And to be fair on that point, okay, if GoFundMe was freezing the funds on every $1 million plus GoFundMe and initiating an investigation to make sure the money was going where it was supposed to be going, then nobody would have blinked twice over the Canadian trucker funds. But the fact that GoFundMe doesn't not do that to every GoFundMe that breaches $1 million or more in funds, that's what really raised state level investigators' concerns that, well, we think GoFundMe did something very illegal here. And that's so as I said, is what Newegg did with the newsletter, the shady operations in promoting scalpers, is not necessarily going to attract federal attention because the current federal law enforcement agencies have no intention of enforcing law. They have every intention of enforcing tyranny and shutting down people who point out that the Biden administration is an illegitimate U.S. presidential administration. Oh, gee, nobody's ever going to hear this live stream ever, are they now? Oh, no, what will I do next? Don't care. Anyway, so keeping all of these factors in mind, it's almost trivial to trace a pattern of how Newegg got from point A to point B. They hired the wrong people who gave the wrong advice, who said, yes, we can get away with this. We can do this. Well, no, you really can't. There are laws against extortion. There are laws against fraud. There are definitely laws against committing extortion and fraud. Just because somebody else did it doesn't mean you have to go ahead and do it yourself. Let's see if I can make this jump. Yeah, and we're actually an hour and 20 minutes, so probably going to run till I get the rest of the badges in this area and then cut it there. So I realize a lot of this is just circling back around. So Newegg's skeevy behavior, the decision to knowingly sell bad parts and then try to palm those parts onto consumers, it's not really a big surprise. It's just another natural step, and this is something that, well, CompUSA got busted for. CompUSA was known to take, and particularly cases, CompUSA was known to take cases that had bends, missing screws or whatever back, and then put them out for sale again. And so if you went into CompUSA, you'd buy what you thought would be a new case, and then you'd find out that it was missing items. It wouldn't have the mounting brackets that, may have been pictured on a case. And, if you went to, took it back to the store, like, oh, well, that's just how it shipped. It was factory sealed, wasn't it? And you kind of have to sit there and go, okay, yes, there was taped and it looked factory sealed. And unless you were working at CompUSA in the back, you didn't know that they had the tools and utilities back there to make a box look like it had been factory sealed all over again. So this kind of behavior is not unknown from CompUSA. In fact, it's one of the things that Newegg really made bank on when Newegg first started out as a website, and that if you bought something from Newegg and it said it was new, chances are it was actually new. It was in its box. All the parts were there, so you weren't futzing around trying to find something that, well, wasn't there. Now, why do I keep bringing up CompUSA? Because I am 99% certain that if you look at recent hires for Newegg, and I mean recent, I mean in the last 6 to 8 years, you'll find that there are some names that coincide between CompUSA and Newegg.com. So what I am outright saying is I'm pretty sure that Newegg hired the same bad decision makers who ran CompUSA into the ground, because those bad decision makers had a reputation and a history. They managed a national retail chain that did have millions in sales. That they managed it into the ground was immaterial. They had experience in the kind of operations that Newegg is presently running. And that's probably how those people got hired, is they traded on a reputation and experience that they didn't actually have. All right, we're heading on to the last 4 badges for River Rat. First badge should be up here. And I think that's why we've seen so many other bad decisions being made by Newegg.com, is they have hired executives, 3 badges to go. They have hired executives who looked good on paper, who sounded good on paper. But those executives already ran one company into the ground, straight into bankruptcy. And Newegg.com, and here's kind of the point where we circle all the way back around. Excuse me for a second. Okay, 1 more badge to go. There we go, River Rat. All right, 1 second. All right, and the reason why let's circle this all the way back around and try and round it up in a nice, pithy final segment. GameStop can't recover from the death spiral that it's in. Gamers who buy niche products aren't going to shop at GameStop. Gamers who buy mass products aren't going to shop at GameStop. Gamers who buy collectible products aren't going to shop at GameStop. GameStop's lost the core market that made GameStop what it was, or it made GameStop the place to go get games. GameStop lost the ability to be the place that people went to go get games. Now, flash forward, and you look at the executives that are being hired, and you're looking at the industry insiders who are being shuffled around from one location to another. And you can kind of see the same thing happening in other retailers in other areas. Newegg hired the wrong people to try and grow the business. Like GameStop, Newegg has effectively shoved itself out of the market that it created. It is thanks to Newegg's shenanigans that entities like AliExpress, Banggood, and DHgate, which would never be on the tip of tongues in non-Chinese markets, are now seen as viable electronics resellers, even if they are selling cheap knockoff products for the most of the time. Or they're selling, how can I put this? Sometimes there is no polite way to say something. They're selling products that they know are that they know are copycats, as like the fake Rolexes. So it's kind of keeping that in mind. And we're going into an election cycle, at least in the US. And that there's no political party right now that is focusing on addressing the market shenanigans. There's nobody who's addressing. There's not really a party that's addressing what it's going to take to bring the bad actors back under control. But there is a political party that does actively stand against the socialists who have enabled this fiscal and financial misbehavior. So as I close out this, ask yourself a question. Do you want somebody like Biden who's just going to let criminals break the law and instruct law enforcement to do nothing? Or do you want somebody like Governor Santanis? Am I saying his name right? DeSantis. Knew I wasn't saying his name. Do you want somebody like Biden who tells law enforcement, don't investigate, don't prosecute? Or do you want somebody like DeSantis in Florida, or the Texas governor says, hang on, you just broke laws, we're going to press charges? Which political party is DeSantis in? Which political party is the governor of Texas in? That's the question that you have to ask yourself and answer yourself when you look at the shenanigans of Newegg, when you look at the shenanigans of NVIDIA, when you look at the shenanigans of ASUS, when you look at the shenanigans of MSI, when you look at all of the criminal activity, the graphics cards that are being sold, not to intended clientele, but to digital currency miners, when you look at the partnerships with the Chinese Communist Party, who is standing against that? Who's saying we need to prosecute that? Who's saying these people need to go to jail? And who's saying, oh, no, let them out of jail, we took a bribe? Who's taking money? Where's that money going? To put it bluntly, who paid Newegg to put scalper advertisements in a newsletter? Who authorized that? What crime did they commit? They committed fraud, they committed extortion. Press those charges. Ask your congressman, ask your senator, why are they not pressing charges? Why are they not pushing this? Why are they not fighting back? Why are they not representing your financial interests? Let me make it clearer. When it comes to games, Biden is tyrant. He is the leader of Praetoria. He thinks that he's created a golden utopia, but all he's done is create wreck and ruin. He's ruined people's lives. He's ruined people's employments. He's destroying the ability of the country to fend for itself. He's destroying the country to produce for itself. Are you going to stand against that? Or are you going to say, you know what, we'll take this fake utopia. We'll take that shiny tower. Well, I say fuck it. Take Biden down. Put him in jail where he belongs. I'm Aurian Archive.